For the past week, everyone is talking about Grixis and Final Fantasy Draft. I'm finding it much harder to get into those colors, and I believe they're being overdrafted. But in a format where every color pair but red-green performs nearly equally, using this metagame knowledge can help you position yourself into the open lane quicker. This means starting in green or white. We already covered starting in green in our last episode on Sultai. I'm still having great success with that strategy, and while my trophy rate has dropped from 50% to 40%, I've maintained my overall win rate in the upper 60% range. See our video in the link above or in the description below for an overview on that strategy. The other strategy I've been having a lot of success with that actually makes up the majority of my trophies are white decks. I'd classify all these decks as proactive aggressive decks, even though they vary on how quickly their aggression plays out. Today we'll cover what each of those decks looks like. We'll start with the fastest of those decks in white-red. These decks go under all the other decks in the format before they can set up their plan. I'm usually winning by turn 6 with these decks, but they can still win as late as turns 9 to 11 with some perseverance. A key to this deck is Magitech Infantry, and I don't think I'm going into this deck without seeing one pick 6 or later in pack 1. In fact, I prefer seeing at least one stronger white signal before pick 6, since these decks are usually heavy white with some red support. I want to know I'm going to get at least 3 Magitech Infantries, preferably more. These give your decks the perseverance I was talking about. Paying 3 mana to draw a 2-1 and put it onto the battlefield is excellent. Think of it this way, it's not uncommon to pay 2 mana for a 2-1. Paying 1 more mana to draw out of your deck as card advantage is great, and when it's in your hand, it's only 1 mana to play. Delivery Moogle plays really well with it, since it can pull a Magitech Infantry that died out of your graveyard and play it on the same turn at 5 mana. That happens to be the most mana I'm looking to get to in this deck, as I'm usually only playing 15 lands, and looking to have the vast majority of my creatures be 2-drops. Although the uncommon 2-drops like Dragoon's Lance and Albert Steiner are best, basically any of the 2-drop creatures will do. Load up on them whenever you're not needing to spend your picks on the most powerful cards. Outside of rare bombs, the most powerful cards include cards like Samurai's Katana, Gallicat, Magitech Armor, and Zidane, and removal spells like Battle Menu and White Auracite. You are trying to relentlessly go wide or evade to finish the game quickly. Because of your ability to go wide, cards like You're Not Alone are great. It's effectively a 1-mana removal spell or a win the game on an unblocked creature spell. Similarly, this is the best deck for Summon Chocomog, which I feel is really a secret white-red gold card. I actually don't care too much about the equipment synergies, and I don't prioritize Weapons Vendor too highly, although it's playable if you happen to pick up 5 to 6 the 2 to 3 drop equipment that you're really just playing as good creatures. Lastly, you're looking for a few spells to close out the game, and I really look to play 1 to 2 copies of Aerith Rescue Mission for that. This is my favorite white deck, but it requires white to be wide open. Let's take a look at one of my white-red trophy decks. We have 4 Magitech Infantry, a bunch of 2-drop creatures, a couple Summon Chocomogs, a Samurai's Katana, and 2 Aerith Rescue Missions. I did get a Bomb in Dion, but I don't actually think it won me any games. I played 3 tap lands, which I would consider to be the max for this deck. I wanted 10 white sources. On second thought, it probably would have been better to cut 1 tap land for another plains. The deck went 7-1. Next up in speed, we have white-blue. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder to tap that like button down below, and on to white-blue. Unlike white-red, white-blue is a deck I'm really looking to have some bombs for before I decide to go into it. Although I still love Magitech Infantry in this deck, white-blue is less dependent on it, as blue has card draw for perseverance and leans more on evasion than go wide to close out the games. Instead, cards like Ilmeg Pixie, Dragoon's Wyvern, and Gallicat shine. When you're winning in the air, your 2-drops are able to toe the line between aggressive creatures and defensive creatures. You don't mind trying to win the game early, but gumming up the ground and winning in the air is also an option, so don't sleep on cards like Sahagin, Wall of Omens, and Scorpion Sentinel. I'm looking to play more lands in white-blue than white-red, because I'm often playing card draw like Combat Tutorial for this deck's perseverance, and when you draw more cards, you want the mana to cast them. I also like being able to hit 7 or 8 lands for finishers, like the Crystal's Chosen, Absolute Virtue, or Summon Knights Around, in case the game goes long. White Auracite in particular goes up in value if you're able to get one of those cards. Let's look at one of my white-blue trophy decks. I have 2 Magitech Infantry and a couple of Sleep Magics, which are efficient removal in this deck. A lot of 2-drops, both aggressive ones and defensive Scorpion Sentinels. The deck thrives on artifacts supporting 3 Gallicats. Eject is perfect in this deck as a tempo and card draw spell. White Auracite also clears the way and ramps up to Machinist Arsenal or Absolute Virtue. Next up in speed is white-black. I actually think this deck can play a faster version similar to white-red, or a slower version similar to white-blue. The faster version is heavy white and basically mirrors what we discussed in white-red, but uses Albed Scavengers for late-game reach to hit the opponent, and the rest of black spells to remove large creatures from blocking your go-wide plan. The slower version is less dependent on being nearly mono-white, and therefore is more reliable to come together. It focuses on accruing little bits of value with all your cheaper cards, and hopes to run away with the late game. Cards like Undercity Dire Rat give you an early game creature for chip damage or survival, and die into ramp for your late game bombs, and I recommend when possible to save those treasures to be able to cast those bombs earlier. Cards like Demon Wall buy you time with a big early blocker until the late game, when it can continually grow into a large threat and actually win you the game. Your cards are often not too threatening until the later game, and so you're looking to play a small game with few resources on either side of the battlefield by removing as many of your opponent's resources as possible with removal and cards like Heck Dies. Similar to how we said white-red isn't really equipment focused like Wizards indicated in their archetype guide, this deck isn't really sacrifice focused. Yes, cards like Phantom Train can count as your way to close out the game, but you're not really looking to play sacrifice cards like Ahriman unless you run low on playables. Let's pull up one of my white-black trophy decks. We have Cecil, Demon Wall, and Undercity Dire Rat as early plays. Gala Cat for mid-game chip damage and defense. All of our other cards are just highly efficient cards. We have a Bomb and Arden to finish the game, and Marlborough as a big threat that can be recurred by Evil Reawakened. This deck also went 7-1. Last up, we have white-green. I really have only seen slower versions of this deck, and while I don't doubt that there are some viable heavy white faster versions, I do doubt how reliably they come together. The color pair is built to deploy a number of small creatures and pump them for an alpha strike, and that's because green is all about the mana dorks. Cards like Torgal, Gubu Gardener, and Town Greeter. Use these small creatures and ramp like Fenrir and White Auracite to help you deploy as many creatures as you can. On the higher end of the mana curve, deploy 2-for-1s like Renoa Heartily and Fat Chocobo. Once you get enough creatures out, cards like Esper Origins, The Crystal's Chosen, and Rydia's Return can turn all those dorks into game wins. The plan can take a bit to develop, but it's hard to stop because it renders your opponent's Grixis 1-for-1 removal inefficient trying to remove a bunch of 2-drops. If they ever need to tap out to stop your onslaught, their counter shields are down, and you're safe to play your large pump spell. This deck, being green, is also easy to splash in. Let's look at our last trophy deck. It plays a lot of cheap creatures like Grand Pulse Ocho, Magitech Infantry, Ambrosia Whiteheart, Curl, Torgal, Town Greeter, and White Mage's Staff. We did get some bombs in Smuggler's Copter, Fanat, and Genova with the Black Splash. Prisha's Wanderings, although not a card I love, I'll play a copy when I want to help out the splash and ramp. We have Delivery Moogle and Vanille for card advantage. This deck is very focused on building your own board, but we want at least a couple removal spells to deal with your opponent's bombs, so Chocobo Kick and Sephiroth's Intervention help here. And lastly, Renoa Heartily and the Crystal's Chosen help us go wide and buff our creatures. In these decks that ramp to a lot of mana, and often self-mill with Town Greeter, it's great to have a copy of Eden. I will say I like white-green a bit less than the other white color pairs, because if your opponent is able to hold up a counterspell against your pump, they're likely to win. But I find myself getting into great versions of white-green because, like we said at the start, everyone's playing Grixis right now, so white and green tend to be wide open. That's all for today. See you in the next one.